Welcome to Brookline's Martin Luther King Jr. Day celebration. It's held each year here at the Coolidge Corner Theater. I'm Bernard Green, Chair of the Brookline Select Board and Chair of the committee that organizes this event to honor King and his life and the still relevant social justice issues for which he fought and ultimately gave his life 52 years ago. We have a great program for you today. Ruth Ellen Fitch, a 50-year resident of Brookline, will give some remarks. Then she and I will have a conversation on today's topic, Roxbury to Brookline, One Family Story. As always, the purpose of our program is to help give you a deeper understanding of the complexities and nuances of the struggle for civil and human rights and its impacts on people in Brookline, and to provide inspiration that hopefully will motivate you to do your small part to make Brookline, America, and the world better places for us all. Following the traditional singing of Lift Every Voice and Sing, sung by Leontine Price, we will hear from the Brookline High School a cappella singers, the Testosterone. It's not funny. It's a great name. And then a reading by Brookline's poet laureate, Z. Wrestling. Next will be a medley by the Brookline High School Glee Club. And finally, a performance reading by everyone's favorite poet, Reggie Gibson. Lift Every Voice and Sing has been called the Negro National Anthem, and traditionally people have stood when it is being played. But that is not necessary in a program like this, especially if you're elderly. We try to make Brookline's Martin Luther King Day more than just a typical perfunctory gathering on the holiday that schools and towns across the country are offering up. In addition to our unique annual program here at the Coolidge Corner Theater, the committee adds a service component to the celebration. This year, under the leadership of the great Shelby Boyd, we've got so much for our town. Hadassah Margolis and Caitlin Starr, several service programs were held prior to this event that reflect Martin Luther King's vision. The committee also organizes events throughout the year that are listed on our home page on the town's website. Finally, we ask that you not listen to this program passively, as if you were stooping outside our current reality and looking in. Rather, we ask that you think about events in today's world and this program, and then ask yourself, what would Martin Luther King do? Do we have the music? Please start the music. You definitely don't want me to sing. will work out perfectly, but that's all right. Because next we're going to hear from Testosterone from Brookline High School. Next, Brookline's Poet Laureate, Denise Leslie, will have a reading of two pieces. We call it Two Visions, Freedom or Repression.
Well, thank you very much, Bernard. But before I do that, I have a book I want to give you. It's Why We Can't Wait by Martin Luther King Jr. And I wrote in it, to Bernard Green, thank you for leading the Martin Luther King Jr. ceremonies in Brookline. And I'd like to present that to you. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to read a poem by Claude McKay. Claude McKay was born in Jamaica in 1889. He wrote about social and political concerns from his perspective as a black man in the United States, as well as a variety of subjects ranging from his Jamaican homeland to romantic love. The poem I'm going to read was written in 1925 and first appeared in a magazine called The Liberator. I can believe it can be taken two ways. The first, reflecting his attitude toward white society and White Houses, and the second could be the White House in Washington, where the president was Calvin Coolidge, and America was a segregated nation. And in fact, when it was first published, they changed White House to White Houses so that it wouldn't be reflected on the president and the Capitol in Washington. And my feeling is that's the way it was originally meant. And remember, this poem was written 90 years ago. The White House. Your door is shut against my tightened face, and I am sharp as steel with discontent, but I possess the courage and the grace to bear my anger proudly and unbent. The pavement slabs burn loose beneath my feet, and passion rends my vitals as I pass, a chafing savage, down the decent street, where boldly shines your shuttered door of glass. Oh, I must search for wisdom every hour, deep in my wrathful bosom, sore and raw, and I find it the superhuman power to hold me to the letter of your law. Oh, I must keep my heart inviolate against the potent poison of your hate. Very powerful poem. Now, that's sort of the repression. Now, a little bit about the freedom. And then President Jimmy Carter gave the Presidential Medal of Freedom to Martin Luther King, and the citation, it read as follows. Martin Luther King was the conscience of his generation, a Southerner, a black man. He gazed upon the great wall of segregation and saw that the power of love could bring it down. From the pain and exhaustion of his fight to free all people from the bondage of separation and injustice, he wrung his eloquent statement of his dream of what America could be. He helped us overcome our ignorance of one another. He spoke out against a war he felt was unjust, as he had spoken out against laws that were unfair. He made our nation stronger because he made it better. Honored by kings, he continued his last day to strive for a world where the poorest and humblest among us could enjoy fulfillment of the promises of our founding fathers. His life informed us. His dream sustains us yet. Thank you.
Recognize that there are ties between us, all men and women living on the earth, ties of hope and love, sister and brotherhood. That we are bound together in our desire to see the world become a place in which our children can grow free and strong. Shed a little light, oh Lord, so that we can see. Oh, now, just a little light, oh, just a little light, oh Lord. Send it on up, send it on up, Lord. Send it on up, oh Lord. Yeah, now, wanna walk it on down to shed a little light, oh Lord. Shed a little light, oh Lord.
Reggie Gibson will be reading his poem, or performance, whatever you can call it, From an Old Head to Young Bloods, Advice from Black Men Coming of Age. Reggie?
Good afternoon to you all. It's always good to be able to say a good day, morning, afternoon, evening, because as I've been told, sometimes many of us don't wake up at night. Wake up in the morning. I've been told that we lose between 125 and 145,000 people every night. Sometime between 11 p.m. and 4 o'clock in the morning. My great-grandfather would say that today we find ourselves on the right side of the grass. It's always a good thing. In this new era that we've entered, one of alternative facts, it's become easier for many of us to turn inward and believe that the way we see the world is the way it is for everyone. In my travels across this country, I have seen that to be the case, not just in places we would expect to see it, places of provincialism, where the citizens are less educated, less affluent, and less progressive than places like this in my own Lexington, but also in educated, progressive, and affluent multi-ethnic communities as well. Just a cursory conversation about racial differences in discipline in the schools will garner often a defensive, that's not true. Or, well, that happens to the Metco kids, right? Or when we talk about racist slurs against black people, most especially black boys, one gets, at least I get this, well, their mother's white, and you live here, so that doesn't happen to you, does it, right? Wrong. Happens to my kids, and it happens to other African American and black kids here in Brookline. How do I know? Because my son wrote something, a letter to Lexington, and kids from Brookline said, that represents our experience, would you please send us that? That was sent to them, and parts of it were read here at the UU Church in Brookline. Perhaps some of you were there. My kids and others have been told what they cannot do because they are black, what they cannot read because they are black, what troops of Boy Scouts they cannot join because they are black, what corps they cannot be part of because they are black. Subtle jokes that aim at what is perceived as their lack of intelligence strictly because they are black. Yes, it happens in Massachusetts. And my kids have heard this not from adults directly, but guess what? From their peers, from children, from teenagers. My oldest son, Jordan, was so sick of it that when he wrote that letter, he just expected it to just get out to a few people. It kind of went viral. Because it represented an experience that a lot of black youth have growing up in progressive, affluent communities. Well, Jordan is in college now, and before he left, we had a talk. Talked about how to be in this world that says one who looks like you should not be here. And I passed along what I hope will grow into some seeds of wisdom for him that my father passed along to me. He, Jordan, and I, and my youngest, McKenna, have had quite a few such discussions. Many black men have these discussions with their sons. They are often known to the outside world as the talk. Being a writer, I began to write down some of these items in the talks we had. I wanted to leave them with something written in case anything happened to me. I mean, now that I am a man of a certain age and am statistically considered less threatening and thus more easily tolerated by those who create stereotypes of black men, I know I am not completely out of the woods. And as I began writing, it hit me that I knew many black men with sons who I could ask what advice they wanted to pass on, and they eagerly did so. And that because of what I do, I also knew that I had access to the minds of young black men. I often sometimes teach in the prisons, and I teach also in urban areas. And I could pass on some of this advice to them as well. Today I present a bit of that to you. A community made of many people who don't need this advice, but who may need to hear this advice. Because we cannot have love unless there is understanding. We cannot understand anything unless there is truth. So as I do, I invite you to wrestle with this, because wrestling is one way that a community gains strength. I invite you to fight whatever that is inside of you that is resistant to that, because fighting what is resistant to any kind of truth of another is a way to learn how to fight for the truth. And as you fight, ponder the reasons why you may have never passed on this advice. Hey there, black boy. Relax. I know why you can't. Look, I just want to talk to you. I want to let you know I understand many of the things I see you going through. See, I was a black boy. I grew up in this country too. Now I got gray hair. Yeah, I learned a thing or two. Like how to not get eaten, though you're in the lion's mouth. Like how to not get taken, though they come to take you out. Like how to beat a system bent on beating up your life. How to not get sniped. How to dance in their rifle sights. See, all around you right now are red dots, and they searching for your head, son. All around you are red dots, son. They're searching for your head, kid. See, when you were born, that's the first thing they messed with. And they're going to keep coming at you to attack and hack into your mental till it's lentil sized, brutalized by lies about your potential, telling you you won't be nothing. You hear that? Subtle and atmospherically. Telling you you won't be nothing but some kind of thug selling, that poverty and prison are going to be your only options. Make it hard for you to become educated so you stay underfed and underrated until you end up a fist fated to be incarcerated. Yeah. That's the game. And there just plain ain't enough of us around here to give you the skinny on how this biz is going down. Too many, admittedly, of us old heads step to you like we're your rivals. But I am concerned deathly recently for your survival, because I know that for the grace of older heads looking out for me, I wouldn't be here today to tell any of you young bloods anything. So I just ask you, listen to what it is I've come to say. Take the best of what makes sense to you. Throw the rest away. First, get the dictionary. Wrestle with those words and learn to use your oppressor's language better than they can. Because in the language lies your oppressor's truths and lies, and learning how they twist them together might better help you to survive. Then practice at least 4 distinct categories of speech. 1 for the courthouse, 1 for the streets, 1 for the classroom, 1 for your peeps. And know you will be judged by the way that you speak. You will be judged by how often you swear, judged by the cut of your hair, how you slouch in that chair, by how often they scare, of the truth you declare, of the swagger you dare, the color we both share, the bling and clothes that you wear. So refuse to wear anybody's brand name across your chest unless that brand has done something for this world you can respect. Because to present your body in somebody else's name is exactly what it was to have been a slave. Then go get a hand drum and get to drumming, son. Why? Because the drum is what the oppressor took away from your ancestors to try to make them act more Western, keep them from communicating messages of freedom and escaping. And if you're like me, you'll find that when you close your eyes and your hands strike that boom bap, boom bap, boom bap, boom bap, you'll get just a little bit of Africa back. And know that that the reality of being a man who's black means that 4 of your heads bobbing inside of one car will eventually equal at least one guaranteed pullover by 2 racist cops. Especially when you got one hip-hop album on blast. Yes, this is racist arithmetic, but you better learn this math. And when you get pulled over, and you will, remain still and keep both your hands visible. And when they try to enrage you, and they will, you remain chill, cool, calm, and sensible. And know that many of your peeps who ain't black like you will never understand what it is you're going through, and some others won't give a damn what it is you're going through. So be careful which racist white folks you let know what's killing you. See, too many see things as a misguided zero-sum game and will gain a sick sense of superiority in their profit and your loss, and would rather see you grope without hope than pay what equality of opportunity costs. Some would rather see you hurting than as a full person, and if you die in destitution or on the streets, clock, 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 shot by cop, some will just rationalize it, justify it, and say, he must have done something to deserve it. And not just racist white people, but some who should know better, some who are white adjacent, some immigrants, some Latinx, some Indian, some Asian have been tacitly told that seeking their American dream means learning to snore through your historic American screams, that acknowledging them might compromise their achieving things, keep them from receiving things they are told worth having, like a chance at grabbing that American brass ring. So, to prove who they're loyal to, some of them will do almost anything, like lend their voices to the racist chorus and sing, like look at you, look at your head, pick up a stone, weigh its weight in their hand, and then fling, regardless of how much of your physical and mental maiming and murder it brings. That's the truth, son. And in spite of that, when you go through life, you absolutely must give everyone you first meet respect, but no trust. Respect is something you give anybody who is breathing. Trust you reserve until there is a good reason. And if there isn't one, leave them alone, son. Never be afraid to remain on your own, son. And no matter how much pressure this world will put on, son, as a poet, I'm telling you, there's something to that cliche about how pressure creates diamonds. And though you got your flaws, you keep shining. Dig deep down for your gifts. Challenge yourself and others, and you'll find them. And whatever you do, represent excellence. For while the world plows a path that allows for the worst of white males to become president, it makes absolutely no place for mediocre black men. And sometimes you're going to flail, and you're going to feel like crying. Sometimes you're going to fail, want to lay down and start dying. But you only truly fail when you put your hands away. You just let this world make you stop trying. And when that happens, you remember what the mother said to her son. Life for me ain't been no crystal stair. But you got to keep climbing. You fight back twice as hard. Duck and dodge, keep up your guard, keep a lifted voice and a lifted vision, and when you can, keep a compassionate heart. Take every opportunity you have to learn, listen, study, grow, not just book smart, but life wise. Black boy, rise and sing in the dead of night. Take those broken wings you've got and learn to take flight. Take those tear-sunken eyes of yours and learn to see and know how much was given for you to be free. Know you are the result of your ancestors sacrificing and bleeding. Know you will never know their faces, but know you are what they prayed for. You are the answer to their pleading. Keep growing, keep learning. Keep your mind turning. Keep your fire burning. Keep believing.
our state representative, Tommy Bertolo. Tommy?
I'm actually not going to read the whole thing. There's a lot of whereases. I want to steal a minute to use humanity's first renewable resource, the thank you. And I'm going to thank two sets of people who are here. The first are every single person in this room who is running for Congress. And as far as I can tell, there are two of them, Dave Cavell and Jesse Mermel. Please stand up and wave so folks can approach you afterwards and find out about what you're all about. We're going to have a new congressperson, and we want to choose the one that works for us. So thank you for being here. The second group I would like to thank are the people who have helped make this event accessible to as many people as possible, including the person right here. So thank you for doing what you do, so that we all can participate. As I said, I'm going to skip a little bit. This is a proclamation from Governor Baker. Whereas activist, pacifist, and driving force behind the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was born 91 years ago, January 15th, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia. And whereas an advocate for nonviolent protest, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. dedicated his life working with dignity and courage towards equality for all people. Dr. King's message of hope, equality, and peace lives on and continues to inspire people throughout the world. Now, therefore, Governor Charles D. Baker of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts does hereby proclaim January 20th, 2020 to be Martin Luther King Jr. Day and urges all of the citizens of the Commonwealth to take cognizance of this event and do exactly as you are doing, participate fittingly in its observance. Thank you. It's not a book, Chair, but it's something.
And Tommy, we really appreciate your getting the governor to sign this proclamation. You do a good job there in the House of Representatives, and thank you for all of that. We all know about John Lewis, one of Martin Luther King's key lieutenants in the struggle in the South. A civil rights icon, genuine American hero, and representative in the U.S. Congress from Georgia. Brookline has many connections to John Lewis, including his participation in the Sojourn to the Past program that for many years Brookline High School students took or participated in, which is a life-changing trip through the South to experience the history and sights of the civil rights movement. On December 30, we received terrible news from John Lewis. In a statement, he said, "I have been in some kind of fight for freedom, equality, basic human rights for nearly my entire life. I have never faced a fight quite like the one I have now. This month, in a routine medical visit and subsequent tests, doctors discovered stage 4 pancreatic cancer." He continues, "While I am clear-eyed about the prognosis, doctors have told me that recent medical advances have made this type of cancer treatable in many cases, that treatment options are no longer as debilitating as they once were, and that I have a fighting chance. So," he says, I have decided to do what I know to do and do what I have always done. I'm going to fight it and keep fighting for the beloved community. We still have many bridges to cross. There's probably little hope after a diagnosis like this. All we can do is to keep John Lewis in our thoughts, and if you are a prayer, to keep him in your prayers. We can also, while he is still with us, listen to, read, and reflect on his work and words, and keep his spirit alive by how we commit ourselves to making the world better. I'd like to read a few quotes from John Lewis for people to reflect on. And of course, these quotes are all over the internet. You can find your own, probably more interesting or appropriate for you. But these are four that I find particularly useful in this time. He talked about the nature of politics. He said, "We're involved now in a serious revolution. The nation is still a place of cheap political leaders who build their careers on immoral compromises and ally themselves with open forms of political, economic, and social exploitation." He talked about class versus race and found wisdom in Boston's own Malcolm X, who said, "We are involved now in a serious revolution." I'm sorry. Malcolm talked about the need to shift our focus from race to class, both among one another and between ourselves and the white community. He said he believed that was the root of our problems, not just in America, but all over the world. Malcolm was saying, in effect, that it is a struggle for the poor, for those who have been left out and left behind, and that it transcends race. And that's sort of a message of Martin Luther King. So the conflict between the two is not as significant as some people would like to believe. And then on the long game, he said, "We used to say that ours is not the struggle of one day, 1 week, or 1 year. Ours is not the struggle of one judicial appointment or one presidential term. Ours is a struggle of a lifetime, or maybe even many lifetimes, and each one of us in every generation must do our part." And then a quote from John Lewis on women in the struggle. "Maybe, just maybe, there should be a graphic novel dealing with the contributions of the women of the civil rights movement, to tell their story, the pain, the hurt. They raised their children, some were working as maids, but when they left those kitchens, those homes, they made it to the mass meetings. And they put their bodies on the lines too." Thank you, John Lewis. I urge everyone to study the life of this extraordinary human being. A few books by John Lewis are the acclaimed graphic novel memoir trilogy, March. Also, Across That Bridge, Life Lessons and a Vision for Change. And finally, a memoir, Walking with the Wind. There are many other books about John Lewis and the civil rights movement, some of which are listed in your program, and many of which you can find just across the street at Brooksellers. So, again, thank you, John Lewis, and let's keep him in your thoughts. So, next, let's start with our program. Roxbury to Brookline, One Family Story. Let me find my notes here. So now we're going to go into our program with keynote speaker Ruth Ellen Fitch, who has lived in Brookline exactly 50 years, having moved to 126 Lancaster Street in January of 1970. Following her keynote remarks, Ruth Ellen and I will have a conversation about this afternoon's program, Roxbury to Brookline, One Family Story. But first, I'd like to put this afternoon's program in the context of our tribute to the life and struggles of Dr. Martin Luther King. In 1965, after years of organizing against de jure segregation in the South, King turned his attention to the North and the de facto segregation found there. He organized the Chicago Freedom Movement in 1965, which was part of an ambitious civil rights campaign directed at Northern segregation and discrimination. The Chicago Freedom Movement is credited with inspiring Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, known as the Fair Housing Act. But it was the assassination of Martin Luther King that forced action in the House of Representatives to send the act to President Johnson for his signature. It had already passed the Senate thanks to, in part, to the leadership of Massachusetts' own Ed Brooke, who passionately spoke of his return from World War II as a decorated veteran of a segregated Army combat unit and not being able to find housing of his choice. The Fair Housing Act included a requirement that municipalities take affirmative steps to integrate housing. But the act was employed for that purpose only briefly during the Nixon administration, when Housing Secretary George Romney, yes, Mitt Romney's father, withdrew federal funds from communities that did not comply with the act. Nixon wasn't having any of that, though, and he quashed Romney's efforts, calling it forced integration. Since then, there have been few efforts to enforce the affirmative integration requirements of the Fair Housing Act at the federal level, and only a few successful affirmative efforts to integrate America's communities by local politicians and residents. This afternoon, we will hear a little bit about one intentional effort by a small group of local individuals and churches who purchased houses and rented them to black families wanting to move to Brookline. In the audience is Harold Peterson, I believe. Is he here? Yes. Harold Peterson is the chair of Brookline's Board of Assessors, who 50 years ago was among that small group of individuals and churches who, with specific intention, engaged in affirmative efforts to integrate Brookline. But my discussion with Ruth Ellen Fitch will not solely be about the integration of the Boston suburbs, but also about the everyday details of life of one black family that moved from Roxbury to Brookline during the civil rights and post-civil rights eras. Hopefully, you will leave this afternoon program with a deeper, more nuanced view of the world in which Martin Luther King lived and struggled, and the world those struggles created for black families. So let me introduce Ruth Ellen Fitch, who served as President and Chief Executive Officer for 9 years at the Dimmick Center, retiring in June 2013. And prior to that position at the Dimmick Center, she practiced law for over 20 years at what was then called Palmer and Dodge, where she became the first black woman partner at a major Boston law firm. Her practice was public law and finance, and she served as bond counsel to the city of Boston and many New England cities and towns and other public bodies. Before attending Harvard Law School, Ruth Ellen Fitch was the director of the medical program in the Brookline Public Schools and taught African American literature at UMass Boston. Ruth Ellen Fitch.
Thanks, Bernard. Gosh, it sounds so long. Thanks for inviting me to speak this afternoon, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion. So I'm going to make this short. So before getting started, I wanted to give a really quick historical context for our discussion and expanding a little bit on some of Bernard's comments. I think in terms of the long arc, the beginning of governmental society change in the 1920s and 30s and 40s. And when I say societal governmental change, I mean the place of black people and the rights that black people had as citizens of the United States. The great migration of black people to the northern cities and jobs really started in the late 20s and into the 30s during the Depression. The legal discrimination that was really supported by the government, both federal government and state governments, written into the laws that didn't change until probably the late 60s and 70s. Some may still be on the books. Then we're moving into World War II and the place of black soldiers. We heard about Ed Brooke, who in fact was a combat soldier, but for the most part, black soldiers in World War II and in the Army before desegregation were the support staff, the cooks, the cleaners. They were not allowed to carry weapons or to use weapons during World War II for the most part. It was only a couple of very elite and very purposefully chosen corps of black men who were able to carry weapons and participate in combat. After World War II, we move into the late 40s. Finally, President Truman desegregated the Army. It was something that the Congress was not inclined to do. He did it by presidential order in 1948. The GI Bill was passed by Congress in the late 40s, early 50s, and really gave a lot of rights and to soldiers who fought in World War II, supporting their education, their ability to buy housing, and really beginning to change the life of the American pattern of living from suburban, or from country to suburban to urban. Very few of the black soldiers who were in World War II and served in World War II were able to access the rights and benefits that Congress passed in the GI Bill for soldiers, so that what we see happening in the 40s and into the 50s and into the 60s, frankly, and from the time on after the 50s, was the discrimination in housing, the discrimination in jobs, the unavailability to black citizens, but particularly, I would say, to black men, to be able to earn the kind of, or to access the kind of jobs that would, in fact, allow them to earn a living that they needed to earn to live the life of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, housing, suburban living, and availability to, quote unquote, the good life. Moving into the 60s, 64, 65, 68, we have the Public Accommodations Act, the Voting Rights Act, and what Bernard referred to, the Housing Act, really aimed at quashing or encouraging, I guess I should say, integration in housing, in voting, and making sure that blacks could vote and had places to stay with the Housing Act. So I guess that what I would say and what I have kind of been working with in my adulthood and frankly in my move from Roxbury to Brookline is legislation that was passed in the 60s and early 70s by Congress and some in Massachusetts that really gave opportunities to the black citizens of the United States to begin to be able to work and function on an equal level with white citizens. I think it's been interesting to look back on the intent of the legislation and see where we are now. Still fighting, still dealing with a lot of wrong thinking, I would say, a lot of attitudes that really support looking at the legislation and not using it for the intent for which it was intended. I have always thought on multiple levels and see myself and my family working not only in our best interest, which is what humans do, but also taking into account the best interests of Black people and the people that we love and work with and live with, and seeing how we can contribute to bringing out the best in people, and a parallel universe, getting what we need in order to be where we want to be. So one of the things we will discuss and talk about and build on is how I have done that with my family and what kind of support we have gotten from federal, state, and local legislation and good intentions and support. So with that background, I'm gonna look at Bernard and we're going upstage.
Okay, Ruth, thank you for your remarks to start off this program. Following up on your comment, maybe talk to us about how your family ended up in Roxbury, an actually vibrant and integrated at the time middle-class community. What is it that happened to your family after the war that resulted in your moving there?
You know, it's in some regards, maybe it's a classic tale of moving. My father's family lived in Warrenton, Georgia. They owned a house, and my father was one of 9. He got 4 older brothers and 4 younger siblings. And as they grew, my grandparents were very concerned about their ability to be educated and to own property, to go to college, get the kind of work that the parents really wanted them to be able to get. In 1924, made the decision to move out of Georgia and to move to Boston. There were other family members who had made that trip from Georgia to Boston. And so my father's family moved here in 1924. He was one of 9 children. They all went to school in Boston once they got here. Graduated from high school. My father went to Boston University and became an accountant and worked for the federal government. Well, I guess first worked for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and ultimately worked for the federal government as an internal revenue agent and then in the small business practice. So my grandparents would look back and say they did the right thing in moving. They got their children opportunities in Boston that they would not have gotten had they stayed in Georgia.
So your family had opportunities that many families did not have at the time. Can you sort of describe what was different? What was it that your parents did that got you, enabled you to be successful in a community like Roxbury?
No, I think they were very intentional in understanding the circumstances that they lived in. You know, the 20s, 30s, 40s today. It is really hard for Black families to live the stereotypic family life because of the opportunities that they don't have and very purposefully don't have. My father's family moved here and they were a support system for each other, which I think was really very important at the time. Not only the brothers and sisters, but there were lots of cousins and aunts and uncles. They were able to find work, and it was menial tasks. They were able to find work and in essence, pass jobs along to each other as either they aged, got older, or openings happened that they could alert people to. So they became a stable group of relatives, and it was cousins, uncles, aunts, and I'm one of the nieces, nephews, daughters. I have two older brothers and a younger sister. As a matter of fact, maybe people know my younger sister, Peggy Williams. She worked at Lincoln School Lawrence School for Annette Baker too, for a number of years. So we kind of stuck together and got information out to each other, and were able to really support each other and take advantage of what opportunities we could come up with.
So it was intentional steps that your family took, moving into Roxbury, going to BU, but also the fact that you had a support network that made that possible.
Absolutely, and it was certainly a family support network, but it was also a neighborhood support network. When my parents moved into Roxbury, it was the early 40s. And it was the beginning, frankly, of the transitions that came about in Roxbury, probably in the 50s and into the 60s. That was a Jewish community that became a black community. And so we were there at the very beginning, I guess I would say, of the transition.
So, just to make clear, other black families who moved to Roxbury and did not have the history that your family has, not because they were less capable, but they may have come to the North under duress and alone, without the support networks and other things necessary to enable them to take a bad situation and make it into what your family is able to make it. Is that a fair statement?
I think it is a fair statement. I think a lot depends upon seizing the opportunities being available, seeing them, noticing them, demanding to have them, or figuring out how to get them.
So tell us about living in Roxbury when you were a child and through your teen years. What was it like? What was the community like? What do you remember? What is the good, the bad, the ugly?
You know, I guess I have to say this in the context of being very independent. And one of the things I have realized a long time, I guess, about myself is that I really do like being independent and being able to do things myself or with a group. But being independent and not having to wait on somebody to do for me, take me, or tell me it's okay, etc. I always kind of push the limits and test the limits and then deal with whatever the fallout is. So when I was growing up in Roxbury, it was a community of people who knew each other. It was a changing community, it was primarily a Jewish community when we moved there. And I went to the David A. Ellis, the Henry Lee Higginson, and then I went to Girls Latin School. So I went to the Boston Public Schools. Just as an aside in that context, and maybe this is a good time to point this out, my sister was 4 years younger than me. I have two older brothers and a younger sister. And when I went to the David A. Ellis and the Henry Lee Higginson, there were primarily white kids in the schools and primarily Jewish kids in the schools. 4 years later, my sister was going to the same schools that I went to, primarily the same teachers, and it was a very different, visually, it was a very different school population of kids. And one of the things that struck me was when I went to the Ellis and the Higginson, kids on particular streets went to those schools, and that was the school catchment area, if you will. My sister, 4 years later, went to those schools, same schools, but the catchment area was different. And what was happening is the school committee, frankly, was beginning to change change the streets that went to of kids who lived on particular streets that went to particular schools. And it was really the beginning of the segregation of the Boston public schools, I realize now. And it was, as I look back on it and think about it, and have done some looking at it particularly, that crucial 4 years really probably was the beginning of a big change that was coming to Roxbury, and including Mattapan and some parts of Dorchester. Having said all that as background, I had fun when I was a little kid. I was very independent, always wanted to do stuff myself, with my older brothers perhaps. So I was always out and about and had, you know, multiple friends and lots to do in my neighborhood.
So, despite the Fair Housing Act that we talked about earlier, black families generally had a difficult time moving to towns like Brookline. So I'd like to talk about your move to Brookline, but also I'm picking up a theme or an idea in your talk of the ability of people to be intentional because of support networks that they may have. And I say that because not only did you move to Brookline, you brought your entire family. A network was created by your presence here that enabled them to move to Brookline. So talk about that and the details of your moving to Brookline.
I went to Barnard College, and my husband, Harrison Fitch, went to Columbia, and we were married in college at the end of our junior year. And then he went to law school at Columbia. So we were in New York for 4 years, which was really an exciting place to live and to learn and to be a part of. Very tiring being in New York, and we both realized that we would not live in New York as adults with a family, but it was a great jumping off point. And we did come back to Boston to live after he went to law school. We lived on Homestead Street for a period of time, but thinking back to how I grew up, I really wanted my children to be able to have the experiences, the opportunity to have the experiences that I had. And for me, that meant really being independent, being able to use the T, get around, go where I wanted to go and do what I wanted to do, all of course with parental support. But I thought it really important that they be independent and be able to be independent. And when we moved to Homestead Street, that was 1969. And it really was a neighborhood in transition, and the kids were almost 3 and almost 1. So I was really looking forward into a time, 5, 6 years down the road when they could play outside, be independent, and really begin to take charge of their own lives, all in the context of the time and the appropriateness of age, etc. Homestead Street was really not going to enable us to have that kind of life, I didn't think, because it was a violent place with a lot of calls to the police, a lot of police presence, and kind of the playing outside, like in the good old days when I would play outside, was very, very different. And I really wanted to be able to find some place that would allow my children to be independent, all in the context of the time and place. So one of the dynamics, and what I guess I should say, my husband had become a lawyer at a big law firm in Boston, and actually he was the first black associate at any big law firm in Boston. He was at Goodwin Procter & Moore, which is now just called Goodwin. And this was the late 60s, 68. And we were on Homestead Street, and we kept saying, we've really got to move. Maybe it's West Roxbury, maybe it's another neighborhood of Boston. Harrison really found out about the Foundation for Brookline Housing through contacts that he had in the legal community. And we began talking with people, I guess I should say he began talking with people about moving. And literally within 6 months, by January of 2000, we had signed an agreement and agreed upon the rent, and we were moving to Brookline. I mean, it happened that quickly. And it happened in the context of really wanting to be able to, I guess, be close to transportation. It actually, it was the context of really wanting a neighborhood like I grew up in. And it worked.
So the Foundation for Brookline Housing was the organization that Harold Peterson, who I mentioned earlier, was a part of. Now, you mentioned the violence on Homestead Street. In our conversations, you talked about the way in which the decline of certain areas of Roxbury occurred, not because of the decline in the people who lived there, but because of intentional acts on the part of various forces in the city of Boston. Could you sort of let the audience know that that is what you're talking about?
That is what I'm talking about.
I mean, for example, some details that you're aware of. Right? I think it's important for people to know that Roxbury became what it may be now because of specific things done by the banks, by city government, federal government, of course, and other forces.
Well, I think what I had talked about with the changing of the school districts, I guess I would call it, and what I think and there was the 1974 Boston school desegregation case that said, yeah, you did it on purpose, and very purposefully. But that was what I saw was really the beginning of that change in the school districts and having white schools and black schools. And when that kind of thing happens, in my judgment, it really sets, it's a trigger that really sets a tone for all the rest that begins to happen in the city. And this story is put together in a sense, looking backwards as well as living it and looking forwards. So it took me a long time to understand that the school committee did in fact change districts so that there were black kids going to school with black kids and white kids going to school with white kids. And it was done intentionally and exploded in 1974 with the court's decision. So that's
Okay. You and your husband and children, Chip and Robin, were not the only members of your family who moved to Brookline. Talk about that network that you created that resulted in other members of your family moving into Brookline and their contributions to our community.
Well, when we moved to Brookline, we were at 126 Lancaster Terrace, a two-family house that was owned by the Brookline Housing Foundation, and really gave us a start, gave several other families a start in Brookline. When we were able to buy our house in 1974, the apartment that we lived in became available, and my brother and his wife moved into that apartment and lived in it for a fairly long time. There were a couple of families that lived on the second floor apartment, and when that apartment became available, my sister moved in. It's all of the family. And that was my sister Peggy that I spoke about, who worked at the Lawrence School. So I had a family support system, or I guess we all had a family support system, in the houses that we rented or the houses that we bought. But it really all started with the belief and thinking of the foundation for Brookline housing. It was really very comforting, frankly, to me, and I think to my brother and sister, when they were able to move to Brookline and take advantage, they had children, take advantage of the schools, in the ambiance of Brookline.
So I hope, before I go on to my next question, I just want to make the point that I hope that this discussion of the Foundation for Brookline Housing gives some of the deep-pocketed residents of Brookline some ideas of maybe coming up with similar programs which provide intentional affirmative steps to integrate the town of Brookline when the normal market forces that we all live under absolutely fail in that regard, as well as with regard to housing for middle-class people of any type. So,
I think that's a good point. Yes.
Any deep-pocketed people in the audience? If you know of some, send them to me, and maybe we can get that, or an idea like that, moving again in Brookline. So, Mandela, you had 3 remarkable careers while you were living here in Brookline. Medical director for the town of Brookline, head of public finance for a major Boston law firm, and director of the Dimmock Center in Roxbury. Is there anything you'd like to tell the audience about those experiences that will give them a better sense of you and your incredible contributions to our area as well as our town?
Well, it was all fun.
Even being a lawyer?
Especially being a lawyer. And it was all, I want to say it was all intentional, not the specifics at the start, but it was intentional to be working, to be involved. And I became the coordinator for the MEDCO program in 1974, working with Bob Sperber, was the superintendent of schools. And in my judgment, he really was a great person to work for because he understood the need for being able to take responsibility for the program, working within the Brookline school system, obviously. And there had not been a full-time coordinator for the program, for the MECO program at that point. So he and I really worked very closely together to make sure that the support for the program was real and important. One of the dynamics that he put in place that I thought was exactly right and really enabled me to work in the program and run the program was I reported directly to him as the superintendent rather than to any of the intermediary school system principals or guidance counselors. And I think that was an important message to the town, to the schools, that the MECO program was really important enough that he was really showing that he was in charge of it and had the person working directly with the program report to him. I did that for 6 years and then decided that it was really, I needed to make a change and I needed probably another degree in order to be able to make that change. And that's when I went to law school.
Any last thoughts about maybe similarities between, in this case, the medical program then and now, or issues or observations that you think we should know about?
Well, the MECO program is still going strong. It is over 50 years, 55 maybe years that it's been in place. And Brookline has always been a leader in the MECO program. It's always had one of the largest number of MECO students coming from Boston to our schools. And it has always had very serious and meaningful participation by parents, which is exactly as it should be for any school system that has any student in it. I'm proud of the work that I did in I guess the support system that we set up for the MECO program that's still going strong. I am a hard worker. I enjoy being a lawyer. I really enjoyed being going back to Dimmock. I grew up about 2 blocks from Dimmock on Harrishaw Street in Roxbury. And being the president at Dimmock really enabled me to give back to my community, to the greater Boston community, in a way that made a huge difference in a huge number of people's lives. I was there for almost 10 years. We really became a multi-service support system and service center. And it's still going strong today. And I think I got it turned around and got it going in a direction that it has enabled it to serve more and more and more patients and clients. And I'm very proud of that.
Great. So I'm getting signals that we're running out of time. I'd like to steal maybe 1 minute from our timekeeper for any final words that Ruth Ellen has for the audience.
Oh gosh, if I only had words of wisdom.
That's actually wisdom.
Oh, okay. Well, I take it on back. I have really loved being in Brookline. Frankly, it's very much like my growing up in Roxbury. And it has really enabled me to live the life that I have wanted to live, and raise my children, go back to school. I was an older person when I went to law school, and my kids were 12 and 14. But being in Brookline, having them at Driscoll and the high school really enabled me to concentrate and go on my law studies, feeling very confident that they were getting great oversight and a great education. My husband was working hard as a lawyer, et cetera, et cetera. So I love it.
Thank you, Ruth Ellen. And as you all know, there will be a new Driscoll School a few years from now. We've gotten the debt exclusion to be able to finance that. So hopefully you'll come back to the new Driscoll School and you and your kids can tell everyone what it was like in the old days.
We knew it when.
Okay, thank you. As we close the program, we must acknowledge the many people and organizations that made this event possible. They're listed in the program, but I want to point out a few that get special recognition. Of course, we always want to thank first the Coolidge Corner Theater for their consistent and much appreciated support and assistance to the committee over the years. Come back to the Coolidge for the midnight showings to show your support for their efforts. Brookline Interactive Group, which has been broadcasting today's event and will be posting it to YouTube if you want to watch it in the future. The League of Women Voters, who every year have the voter registration table in the lobby. If you're not registered to vote, please go out and register with them. Of course, Lloyd Jallow and the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations who provided staffing for the committee in the person of the irreplaceable Caitlin Starr. And of course, the great and always reliable for events and activities in Brookline, Chobe Hoy. And Chobe, Caitlin Starr, and Hadassah Margolis made possible our service programs this morning, which were a great success. We collected books and electronic media for the organization More Than Words, a nonprofit youth empowerment social enterprise. We held an Inspo Expo Mini, a written version of the Inspo Expo Social Action Fair that brings together local organizations and other community members to share their projects and encourage service and activism. A brochure on their programs is in the lobby. And we held a welcome blanket knit-in, which is really great, at Temple Kehila, Israel, to create blankets and notes of welcome for immigrants and refugees in our community and other communities. Very special and inspiring program. Before we leave, a couple of announcements. Because the struggle for social justice is a political struggle, the League of Women Voters of Brookline, as I said, is conducting their voter registration drive in the lobby. Please visit their table if you need to, or if you just want to pick up information on the League's activities. As part of its recognition of the important role Martin Luther King played in opening opportunities for all, the town of Brookline has been making available to the public its annual report on the racial and gender composition of the town's workforce, which will be available on the town's Human Resources Department webpage, probably now, but at least in the near future. Thank you for attending Brookline's 2020 Martin Luther King Jr. celebration.